Did you know that all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics possess the ability to communicate with the dead? Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. In this video, we will learn about mediumship as told by Betty Shine in her book, Mind to Mind, where she explores the phenomenon of communication between the living and the spirits of the deceased, and how this ability helped to provide comfort and insights to those seeking connection with loved ones who had passed away. She also shares her own experiences and insights, emphasizing the importance of integrity and sensitivity. I've come to learn that most people feel uncomfortable about the idea of talking to a dead person who is reaching from the beyond, and I chuckle thinking of the concept of the beyond, which to me really is much closer than we think. But it's bad enough most of us have a difficult time talking to the living. Perhaps, like me, you've had people confide in you that they've had on occasion or two where a loved one has somehow communicated with them, whether it was through a dream or some sign that made it clear to them who it was. And in none of those instances that people talked with me about it did anyone feel creeped out, but it was on the contrary. They were left with a sense of peace and some sense of comfort as well. Before I get into the next chapter, if you are new to my channel, make sure to visit my playlist and grab the first chapter of this book series. And to my family, friends, and subscribers, welcome back. Let me know in the comment, have you ever experienced communication with someone who has crossed over? What was that like for you? I believe that the more we share how natural that is, the less we actually fear death. Please do hit the like button, and if you know of anyone that is interested in this topic, make sure to share the video. And now, I turn the page. Part 1, Spiritual Gifts, Chapter 2, The Experience of Healing. Healing should be a beautiful experience for both patient and healer. It's sad that people are still frightened of the unknown when what they think of as the unknown is so peaceful and loving. When I am healing or giving counseling, a feeling of peace pervades the room. It is as though outside pressures no longer exist. I have always kept my healing rooms simple. No candles, no incense, no little red lamps. They are furnished with just a table or a desk, a couple of chairs, and a medical couch on which the patient can sit back or lie in comfort. In Sutton, I had the ceiling painted blue, which people found very peaceful to look at. In my present house, the room overlooks an enclosed part of the garden, which is also very peaceful. A healing session lasts for half an hour to an hour, depending on the person's condition. I usually give an hour to people who are seriously ill. The healing itself doesn't take this long, but I need the time to talk with them and listen to their problems, and also to give them the clairvoyant advice and information which come through me while I heal. I prefer it if people come having had a medical diagnosis and, if necessary, x-rays. Unfortunately, many people have had bad experiences with doctors and hospitals and don't want any more to do with them. However, I would always encourage anyone who is having medical treatment to stay with it. The very occasional exception is when I see the medical drugs are not only not helping, but also actually damaging the system, as in Jenny's story. People often ask me if the patient have to have faith, to which I sometimes say no, but I do. I have healed some extremely skeptical people over the years. It is true that a receptive attitude and trust in the healer do help. Without this kind of rapport, the relationship is likely to be short-lived. The feeling is usually mutual, and visits cease of their accord. Faith, however, is a different matter. It is very difficult to have faith in something until one has proof that it works. Incidentally, I think that calling healing faith healing is very confusing, particularly as other labels such as spiritual healing are used to describe the same phenomena. As far as I'm concerned, everyone who heals from what I call the source is simply a healer. During healing, nearly everyone becomes deeply relaxed. Quite a few go to sleep on the healing couch, and some feel exceptionally tired for at least 12 hours afterwards. This is because the energy counterpart of the physical body has been manipulated, vibrated, and stimulated in an unaccustomed manner. When people are suffering from severe tension, simply being able to relax can bring about changes very rapidly. I also encourage them to help themselves by teaching relaxation techniques to practice at home. The mother of one of my child patients came to see me with pains in her legs, which she said felt like lead from morning to night. Doctors had dismissed her complaint as a woman's problem. By the time she came to see me, she was, as she put it, totally lost and wondering if I was losing my faculties. I knew exactly how she felt, having been through plenty of stressful times myself. An ability to empathize is very reassuring to people under stress, particularly if they haven't been taken very seriously by their doctor. As she lay on my couch with my hands on her, she told me she felt totally relaxed for the first time in what seemed like years. She could feel her legs tingling and the tension flowing out of her. She worked at practicing relaxation and positive thinking at home and has never been troubled with pains in her legs since the first visit. One side effect of relaxation is that everybody produces incredible tummy rumbles. Some people are rather embarrassed about these unspiritual sounds. "I've just had lunch," they'll say apologetically. "It's not your lunch. It's the healing," I explain. It's a good sign, actually. It means the intestines are relaxing and releasing gases. It even happens to people who aren't even healing themselves but are sitting in the same room. I also deliberately use my ability to make people laugh if I think laughter will release the tension sufficiently to allow the healing energies to penetrate. It's fascinating to see what happens when someone laughs. The mind energy bursts through the top of the head as though from a steam engine. It looks as though people are literally letting off steam. Healing is very safe. In the thousands of years it has been used, there has never been a recorded case of anyone been physically injured or dying as a result of it. It is just not possible. With healing, you simply can't give the wrong drugs or perform the wrong operation. It is also very powerful. Many people underestimate its power because at the time, all they experience is some tingling and heat and a very calm period of relaxation. Then they phone me next day to tell me they have experienced phenomenal effects. I have heard of people being disappointed in healing, especially if they have been misled by an over-optimistic healer or, of course, by a charlatan. There are some around, unfortunately. It is a great pity when this happens. There are also some people who expect healers to be instant miracle workers. It is true that instant miracles do occasionally happen, but for most people, healing takes a little longer. If someone's energy is very depleted, several healings may be needed before their system is charged enough to affect the physical. In some people, the physical has deteriorated to such an extent that no amount of energy can stimulate it to effect a cure. However, I never tell anyone at first meeting that I can't cure them any more than I would guarantee a cure. I ask them about the medical prognosis, which is usually completely hopeless, and then try to find out where the problem is, what's happening, how the life force isn't getting through, and why. To safeguard against disappointment on both sides, I usually suggest that they have 4 to 6 sessions so that we can monitor the results. After this, it should be clear whether they are reacting favorably or not. Even in seemingly impossible cases, miraculous things have happened, and even those who are past curing can be relieved by the removal of congestion. For the last 2 years, I have been specializing in cases that have been labeled as hopeless, and I know that healing can not only remove pain, but also extend lives well beyond the medical prognosis. Many terminally ill people have been able to enjoy their final months and have died peacefully without pain, when according to all the medical forecasts they should have been in agony. There are still people who insist that all healing must be psychosomatic. This is rubbish. For one thing, healing works just as well with animals as with humans, if not better, since they don't put up any barriers. The vets who get the best results are those who, like some doctors, are natural healers. I had been healing animals without realizing it since I was a child. As a little girl, I made up for my mother's refusal to let me have a kitten by talking to every animal I met. There were plenty about in the streets, many of them strays. I found I had an empathy with them, and if they seemed unwell, just holding them in my arms made them better. Animals love healing. They accept the energy and then usually go to sleep, often remaining flat out for the rest of the day. It would be wonderful if human beings could be so accepting and so relaxed instead of rushing back to work or busy domestic duties. A period of rest and quiet is an essential part of the healing process. I remember Mandy, a lovely golden retriever who had arthritic hips. The first time she arrived for healing, Mandy wagged her tail so hard she sent everything flying. It was as though she had already knew that she would be cured. At each session, she would settle herself down on the carpet. As soon as I placed my hands on her hips, she would sigh with contentment, gazing trustingly up at me with her beautiful eyes. It was a joy when, a month later, after only 4 sessions, her arthritis was completely cured. Unfortunately, it isn't always possible to bring about total cure with older animals, but healing can still help them to run instead of walk and enjoy life to the full as long as they can. 2 years ago, I had to give healing to Flossie, our miniature Yorkshire Terrier. We have another bitch called Tessa, a black Labrador type. The two are very good friends, despite the fact that Tessa weighs 40 pounds and Flossie only 4. One day, Alan was about to take them for a walk when Tessa, in her excitement, jumped up in the air and came down with all her weight on Flossie. Poor Flossie was completely flattened, and for some minutes Alan thought she was going to die. For a few days we were quite concerned about her. However, we took her to the vet and I gave her masses of healing, and she was up in about a week after her mishap. But sometime later we discovered a lump in her groin, which was obviously causing her discomfort. Alan immediately took her to the vet, who diagnosed a large hernia which had to be operated on. We were very worried at the idea of her having an anesthetic as she is so tiny, so I gave her intense healing over the 5 days before the operation was due. When the day arrived, Alan took her to the vet. Instead of leaving her with his assistant, he asked for the vet to examine her first. After a thorough investigation, the vet exclaimed, "But the hernia's gone." Alan told him that I was a healer and had been giving Flossie healing, but the vet simply repeated, "Yes, but it's disappeared." He couldn't understand it at all. He said, "You'd better take her home. There's nothing for me to do, but please contact me immediately if it recurs." I am delighted to say that it hasn't. Humans, of course, are suggestible, and the mind undoubtedly plays a very important part in both health and sickness. But during healing, I see clear changes in the body's energy system which cannot be due to suggestion. There are often very marked physical effects too. Indeed, the energy factor can sometimes be quite unnerving. Early on in my work, I was healing a man who was crippled with arthritic knees. He was a beef eater and extremely upset as he'd set his heart on gaining the Queen's Long Service Medal. He had only 18 months to go, but now the state of his knees prevented him from standing for long periods. In fact, he could hardly walk, and then only with a stick. As I was healing him, there was a sudden loud crack, just as though someone had fired a gun. I nearly fell off my stool. Then I realized that the calcium in his knee joints had somehow exploded. When he stood up, he was already able to walk much better. After 3 months' weekly treatment, he was able to resume his job, and he did receive his medal. He deserved it. These cracks and explosions were repeated again and again with arthritic cases, and they always came as a surprise both to me and to the person I was healing. Another very special phenomena has occurred in cases of kidney and gallstones when calcium stones have actually appeared on the surface of the abdomen while I've been healing. With osteoarthritis, the unwanted bone seems simply to dematerialize. I have asked people to try to obtain before and after x-rays so that they can see the changes that have taken place. Unfortunately, hospitals are too busy to take x-rays merely out of interest. One side effect which sometimes alarms people is the appearance of bruising the following day. This happens most often when I have been giving treatment for an internal infection or some kind of muscular pain. It's as if, on its way out, the condition surfaces in the form of a bruise, sometimes very colorfully. Just recently, I gave healing to Jean, a friend who was helping to type this book. She had a thrombosis 17 years ago and had very bad varicose veins. Healing is very effective with varicose veins. I can actually feel them slipping underneath my hands as they straighten out, and they did on this occasion. Afterwards, Jean took her usual walk home across a field. When she came to climb the stiles, she felt as though somebody actually lifted her up and over. I was so light I couldn't feel myself on the ground, she told me. But she rang me up in alarm next morning because her legs were so bruised. She thought something must have gone terribly wrong. I assured her it was quite normal and actually a good sign. As always, the bruising disappeared after 12 hours and her veins are now in excellent condition. Jean also experienced another extraordinary side effect, which you are unlikely to find in any medical book. I had been giving her absent healing for a back condition when she rang me up in great excitement to tell me about the most incredible experience she'd ever had in her life. While she was having her bath that morning, the water had turned bright blue. This phenomenon has happened only 3 times in my experience. Once, when I was living in Sutton, it happened to me. I had been overworking and was so tired that I fell asleep in the bath. When I woke up, the water was a bright electric blue. I couldn't think what had happened and kept looking around to see whether something had fallen into the bath, although I knew nothing could have done. I lay there thinking, I don't believe this. I never got over the wonder of this kind of experience. Although I use color a lot in healing, I have no idea where this blue came from. I use a number of specific techniques in addition to laying on of hands. One, which I call the laser beam, is for conditions such as cellular congestion, meridian lines that are hard to unlock, or any area which is not responding to ordinary healing. I use it especially for eye problems. With my mind, I form a laser beam as powerful energy like a very fine steel rod and direct it towards the trouble spot until it clears. I use my mind to do other things too, such as operating to remove congested energy. For example, if there is an energy congestion in the stomach caused by stress, I create mental instruments and make a cut down the body so that I can pull out the tangle of energy just like a ball of wool. Sometimes it goes on for a long time until suddenly the last bit is pulled free. Then I use the laser beam to seal up the cut. You may say, but that's just imagination. That is to underestimate the power of the imagination. Once you realize its possibilities, whatever you want to do with your mind, you can do. The thought is the deed. I don't tell people what I'm doing until afterwards. But while it's going on, they say, my God, that feels better. I feel as if something's been released. While I am healing, I also receive a lot of clairvoyant information to pass on to my patients, sometimes from dead relatives, sometimes from other spirit helpers. When people first get in touch with me, I always tell them I'm a medium. Some of them don't want to know about this side of my work. I respect this. And if one of their dead relatives tries to come through, I will convey to them telepathically that the healing is more important. But everything I have learned, I have been taught directly or indirectly by spirit minds. Sometimes the phenomena that occur during healing can only be accounted for by their activities, and they can't be ignored. Sometimes they take over altogether. At the start of a session, I usually chat for a while to put people at their ease, but there usually comes a moment when I say, I won't be speaking to you for a little while, and maybe I will take my hands away from you. When I sense that other minds want to come in and work with mine, I must allow them that space. I will suddenly feel a tremendous power coming in, like a physical force always on my left-hand side. Then I know that somebody else's mind has connected with mine, and I will start receiving clairvoyant diagnosis, which is more detailed than in my initial assessment. If I feel it will be helpful, I pass this information on to the person concerned. My healing gifts have been developed by invisible teachers. Invisible to other people, that is, because at times they're quite visible to me. I may just glimpse them, but sometimes I see them with tremendous vividness. I know intuitively that they are doctors and scientists. Quite often I see them standing around the patient, just like hospital consultants, looking at each other and working together. They don't speak, but I am aware that they are very powerful beings. I've been asked why someone who died perhaps 50 years ago should be up to date with treatments. The question made me laugh because they're probably wondering why we are so backward. However, the answer is that doctors and scientists in the next dimension are not working with matter. Those who choose to receive a further education, as it were, are trained to work with the energy fields, which is quite different from working with the physical. Some healers work with a single guide, and I've occasionally been asked whether I've got a red Indian or a Chinaman. I haven't. There are many minds involved in the healing of many different diseases. If I'm working with a disease like cancer, I don't want to be limited to a single source of help. After all, some doctor with a brilliant mind may die tomorrow. He may then be able to come in and help me, and I wouldn't want to shut him out. I've always felt very privileged with the minds that come through. When I start healing, I just close my eyes and say mentally, "Give me the best you've got." On one occasion, faced with a woman in appalling pain from a phantom limb, I simply thought, surely somebody out there must be able to help this poor devil. Instantly she said, "I don't believe it. My arm feels like a heavy block, but the pain has gone." My request may not have been very reverent, but I think it was its fervency that instantaneously drew the right kind of help. When a superior mind connects with mine, I feel totally elated. Sometimes the power is so strong that I know I must put my own hands aside and let them take over. I warn the patient what's happening, but even then they can be very surprised. Recently, I was healing a bank manager. I was sitting at his head when he said, "Someone's holding my feet, Betty." I did tell you I'm a medium. Yes, but someone's holding my feet. To people who haven't experienced this kind of thing, it sounds a bit frightening. I know. When it actually happens to you, it isn't. This man was fascinated by the experience, and some people find it quite beautiful and moving. Sometimes people feel their faces being gently stroked. One couple who came to see me felt hands being gently laid on their chest as they lay in bed that night. They both became so beautifully relaxed that they went straight to sleep. Only at breakfast next morning did they discover that they had both felt the same thing at exactly the same time. You could go into all sorts of hypothetical explanations for their experience. Were they both imagining it? Did their minds link telepathically? In the end, I can only describe what people have felt and seen, and what I have felt and seen myself. This couple knew nothing about healing beforehand. These are the kind of people I listen to because their experience is genuine and unadulterated by preconceived ideas. I know that I am just a channel for all these wonderful things, and I think it's terribly sad that only a small proportion of people are convinced that they can really happen. It's lovely when a patient who doesn't really believe suddenly opens his eyes and says, "Goodness, are you over there? But I thought you were holding my feet." Somebody is. Even more dramatic is when a psychic manipulation or operation is performed while I stand back and watch it happen. Manipulation is something that has built up slowly in my experience. One of the earlier occasions was with a man called Fred. He and his wife Shirley are long-standing friends of mine and have come in for several interesting experiences. Fred seldom enjoys them. On this occasion, I was giving him healing when his arm suddenly started moving. "My arm's going up and down," he said in alarm. "Betty, why is my arm going up and down?" I tried to calm him by explaining that he was being manipulated by unseen helpers. His eyes widened even more, and he said, "I don't think I like this." Since those days, Shirley herself has become very psychic, and Fred has learned to live with it. The most powerful manipulation I ever witnessed was about 10 years ago. David was a young amateur footballer who visited me a lot because he was always damaging himself. He arrived one day in a state of desperation. He had smashed his foot and ankle very badly, and the hospital had told him they could do nothing more for him. He was accompanied by his father, who watched the whole session. Whilst I was healing David, a voice asked me to take my hands away. I told him what I was going to do and why, and moved well away from him. Then we all three watched in amazement as the injured leg was lifted up, pushed about, and thoroughly manipulated. I have had said that healing is painless, and most of the time it is, but in this instance I could tell from his voice and expression that David was in considerable pain. After it was over, however, he was able to get down from the couch and walk about absolutely normally and painlessly. His father said, "Betty, if I hadn't seen this for myself, I would never have believed it." While they were still there, the unseen manipulator informed me that he had been a physiotherapist and trainer with a famous football team. He had died in an air crash, which was widely reported at the time, and now wanted to heal athletes through me. He went into some detail about the crash, giving me the names of the people who had survived, which enabled me to check and confirm his identity. He was a very well-known trainer in his lifetime, and obviously a very compassionate man whose compassion continued after his death. Sometimes I am told to stand aside to allow a psychic operation to be performed. The first time it happened was with a lady in her 70s suffering from diverticulitis. I told her that I was going to take my hands away, and a moment later she said, "Betty, I can feel hands inside me, doing something right down inside of me. I really can feel hands." Again, this sounds much weirder than it actually is. People find it unusual, certainly, but not at all unpleasant or painful. It is fascinating to watch. I can see hands moving over and inside the patient's body. Sometimes I see the faces of the spirit surgeons too. These operations are nothing like the psychic surgery practiced in the Philippines, which is reportedly accompanied by lots of blood and mess. The people for whom I am channel operate on the energy counterpart only. One young woman was due to have a hysterectomy for fibroids when she was recommended to see me. A psychic operation was decided on, and as I watched, I could see the energy counterparts of the fibroids, 3 opaque lumps of energy, actually being lifted out of her body and then disappearing. She could feel hands inside her, but no pain at all. When she went back to the hospital, they could find nothing to operate on. It seems that by removing the congestion in the energy counterpart, the operation enabled the physical fibroids to shrink and vanish from the body. The energy counterparts of our organs are not duplications of the physical organs in the sense of having all the cells and blood vessels on and so on. It is simply that the energy occupying that area of the body takes on the shape of the organ concerned. When there is a problem with, say, the womb, the liver, or kidney, that part of the body has become congested with negative energy, which must be released. The spirit doctors work on it by removing the energy form, reviving and re-energizing it, and perhaps rebalancing energies which have become distorted in some way. When they return the revitalized energy form to the body, it stimulates the physical organ into action. Sometimes I do this operation myself, drawing the energy out with my hands and stimulating it before stroking it back in. I'm always aware of guidance and have learned to trust my impressions totally. For instance, when I started using color healing, I thought for a time that I had to work out what colors were needed and how to project them. Then I realized that the appropriate colors were being beamed down anyway. I don't know whether it is the healer's energy or the patient's need that attracts colors, but they arrive unasked for, and it is clear that there are spirit helpers who know which ones to give. Nearly all my clients see colors to some degree while being healed. Sometimes 2 or 3 shades come in together like a rainbow and play around the patient. One beautiful example of this was when I was healing a young woman who was herself very psychic. She was lying there with her eyes open when she said, "Betty, can you see what I see?" I said, "Tell me what you see." Then she described a whole spectrum of colors. Green, blues, yellows, and purple, which I too was seeing. "It's that wonderful," she exclaimed. It was. It looked exactly as if they were being beamed down by someone with a spotlight. I have had so many experiences like these that I can be in no doubt that other minds work through mine, in a mind-to-mind contact. It seems that my part is to provide an energy field which allows the spirit healers to come in and do their work. They are obviously people who have used these skills before and want to continue using them for the good of mankind. The energy that comes from them is extremely powerful. The patient can often feel it and may describe it as electricity on their face or feeling electrified. As a result, the whole healing room becomes charged with energy. For a long time now, it's been almost impossible for me to tape record anything in this room without tremendous interference. These days, I usually put a new tape on to record while I'm healing. I ask people to bring their own. My healing room is very quiet, and when they hear the recorded sound, people find it very reassuring to have positive proof that there are extraordinary energies in action. Another therapy I use quite often came to me as a total surprise. When I had been dealing for 5 or 6 years, I went to see Nella Taylor, a very talented medium. She knew absolutely nothing about me beforehand, but she told me, "You used your voice for singing. Over and over again, you went up the ladder and you were pushed down again. That's because your voice wasn't meant to be used in that medium. It was meant to be used in the medium in which you are now working." Now she tells me. I thought, but I couldn't make out what she meant, unless she was referring to the fact that people felt better when they heard my voice over the telephone. About a year later, I was healing a boy of 13 who had a bedwetting problem. He was nicely relaxed. We were chatting about his schoolwork when I felt a powerful presence coming in. Then I heard myself speaking in a quiet voice. "Close your eyes." I told him, with no idea why I was saying it, "You will feel your eyelids become heavy. You will not be able to open your eyes. You will not want to open your eyes. Your body is becoming heavier and heavier. You will never wet the bed again." I repeated this several times. The child was by now in a meditative state, though his occasional remarks showed that he was aware of everything that was going on. The whole session lasted about 20 minutes. Still allowing myself to be guided, I brought him back to normal alertness. He had thoroughly enjoyed the experience. "Gosh," he said, "that was marvelous. I felt as if I was flying and I saw these marvelous colors." He never wet the bed again. Like so many things that have happened to me, this experience was totally unexpected. Somebody, I had no idea who, had definitely taken over and guided me. Sometime later, I was passing on a secondhand bookshop with Leslie when I told him, "I've got to go in. There's a book in there I have to have." Inside, I went straight to a thick, closely printed volume on hypnosis by a Dr. Albert Moll, first published in 1889. I have never seen his name mentioned anywhere else. When I got home, I sat down and read it, and as I did so, I had the odd experience of knowing exactly what was going to come next. I had never had it in mind to apply hypnosis to anyone, and it was something I avoided having done to me. Like many people, I didn't like the idea of someone else's mind taking over mine. However, ever since then, I have used hypnotherapy regularly in conjunction with healing when it's appropriate. It has proved invaluable with allergic conditions, which are often stress-related, and also use it to help people give up smoking or to slim. I explained to the person concerned that I'm not taking over their mind, and ask them to tell me what they would like to suggest to them so that we are both working together. Usually they want to be turned off sugar or cigarettes or something similar, and using hypnosis, I am therefore working on their suggestions and not mine. An important aspect of my work is absent or distant healing, giving healing to someone who may be hundreds of miles away. It is a wonderful example of the power of mind energy, which has no limitation and can travel any distance. I have given absent healing to people all over the world and have acquired total faith in it. The success rate is phenomenal, and I recommend it as an alternative to contact healing, particularly if people live far away or are too ill to travel, including accident victims in coma. When the first contact is made, I ask the person concerned or somebody close to me to phone me weekly to keep me up to date with their progress. In 9 out of 10 cases, I receive a phone call within 24 hours informing me that the sick person is already much better. I am usually contacted by phone and also quite often by letter with the patient's name and a description of the medical problem. As soon as I am given the name, I get a clairvoyant diagnosis. This can be very useful, as in the case of a woman who rang me from America to ask for help as she had been feeling unwell for some time without being able to discover the cause. As we were speaking, I learned clairvoyantly that she had diabetes. On my advice, she went to see a specialist who confirmed the diagnosis. I gave her absent healing every day for 2 or 3 weeks, and at her next appointment with the specialist, he told her that the condition had completely cleared. In absent, as in contact healing, I know that it isn't all up to me, and the first thing I do is to ask whoever's listening, will you please help this person? If you have an expansive mind, a mind that extends out to other minds and other dimensions, someone will be listening, and they will always respond. I understand from communication with the minds of the so-called dead that a medium's mind shines like a beacon in other dimensions. I know this to be true and that my thoughts are being picked up and acted upon. The power of thought is a power to be reckoned with. In giving absent healing, my own part is to visualize the person, if I know them, or the affected part of the body if I don't. I then project energy specifically to where it's needed. As with contact healing, I don't limit myself to one specific technique. For instance, I use my laser beam on people who have lost their sight and on other problems where it's appropriate. I find it remarkably effective. Here's a typical example of how absent healing works. Louise, a close friend of mine, was on a motoring holiday with her husband in France. She had misguidedly driven from Burgundy to Geneva and back over mountain roads in one day. The next day, her back hurt so much she could hardly move. Her husband couldn't drive, and they had to get back to Calais. So, feeling quite desperate, she rang me up and asked for help. I told her, "Go back to your room, sit quietly, and ring me back in 20 minutes." I immediately asked for help. Then, using a visualization, I projected energy towards her from the top to the bottom of her back. Louise told me afterwards that when she went to her room, she sat down with a book, but just at the time when I was manipulating energy up and down her spine, an extraordinarily powerful feeling of warmth stole over her. She put her book down and simply sat still and soaked it in. After 20 minutes, she got up easily, almost without a twinge, and rang to thank me. She drove home feeling better than she had for the whole of the holiday. Time, space, skepticism, and even total unawareness on behalf of the recipient do not detract in any way from this form of energy manipulation. A woman once asked me to give absent healing to her brother-in-law in Australia who was about to have an operation for cancer, with only a 50-50 chance of recovery. After working out the time difference, I sat down quietly and sent out healing energies while the operation was taking place. Sometime later, during a post-operative examination, the surgeon remarked that he had experienced an extraordinary phenomena whilst operating. He said, "The heat coming from your body was unbelievable. I have never known anything like it. Can you account for it?" The patient was as bewildered as the surgeon. Unfortunately, his wife, feeling he would be skeptical, told him nothing, and he has had no idea to this day that he was receiving healing or the reason for the heat. But when I last heard of him, he was doing well. I quite often tune in to the patient's surroundings. Giving absent healing at a friend's request to her little niece in a New York hospital, I became aware that there was a huge toy bear standing by the bed. I was puzzled by the size of it. It was the sort of thing you see at fairs or in window displays, but not usually in hospitals. When my friend called next day, I mentioned it to her, and she promised to make enquiries. 3 days later, she phoned to say the child's mother had brought an outsized toy bear and stood it by her daughter's bed on the day when I had given healing. This ability to observe from a distance can be extremely useful, especially if someone is very sick. I may learn, for example, that the circumstances they are living in are making them worse and can then suggest ways to improve them. Absent healing can also work in reverse. A sick person who thinks about me can automatically contact the healing energies around me and receive help, even if I'm not aware of it myself. One day, Alan was in terrible pain with back trouble. He was without his car and about to walk up a very steep hill. He stood still and thought of me, saying, "Betty, please help me." The effect was immediate. The pain went, and he climbed the hill effortlessly. Everyone who visits me for healing has tried thinking of me in this way at some time or other, and no one has ever been disappointed. Just recently, I had a letter from an elderly patient with cancer. He was lying in bed, quite ill. He wrote, when a lady appeared. Although she didn't look like me, she reminded him of me. At that point, his wife came into the room to tell him that I had just phoned and had been giving him absent healing. Other people have recognized me by their bed when they have been ill. I believe this experience is quite common among healers. As with contact healing, absent healing can produce some quite powerful effects. I've told you about Fred, who was scared when his arm was manipulated. A couple of years later, his wife Shirley phoned to say he was in the hospital after having a heart attack, and please would I help? She gave me the name of the hospital, and I told her that healing would begin immediately. That evening, after visiting the hospital, she phoned again. Fred had asked her if I was giving him healing. When she told him I was, he said, "Would you please tell her to stop because I levitated off my bed and I was frightened to death." This feeling of levitation is very common. People don't actually levitate physically, but because the energy counterpart is being stimulated and there is so much energy around, it feels as if the body is weightless and floating. Despite Fred's alarm, the healing was very effective. He underwent numerous tests, but no trace was found of the after effects of the heart attack or of any other form of illness. Another very physical phenomenon occurred with a man who didn't believe in absent healing. He came with his wife, and while I was healing her, he asked if I could do anything for his ingrowing toenail. He had suffered pain in his toe for years and had been to doctors and chiropodists to no avail. When I said I would give him absent healing, he thought I was joking and laughed. I pointed my finger at him and said, "Wait and see." When they returned a week later, he told me that 2 days after that last visit, he had been in agony. To relieve the pain, he had lifted his toenail away from the flesh with a nail file, whereupon a calcium ball the size of a small pea had popped out. It was obvious that this had been inside the toe, pressing the flesh up against the nail and causing the pain all these years. Not an ingrowing toenail at all. This kind of calcium formation can occur with some arthritic conditions like gout. He and his wife examined the toe with a magnifying glass but could find no sign of the place where it had come through the skin, not so much as a pinhole. After that, he had no further trouble with his toe. Although this type of phenomena had occurred before whilst giving healing, it was the first time it had happened with absent healing. I was sorry to learn that they'd thrown the calcium ball away. I'd like to have seen it. Absent healing is wonderful for animals, and I've treated more animals in this way than by contact healing. It can deal with a surprising range of problems. One summer, a friend asked me if I could do something for her dog who had insect bites all over his body. She had applied a variety of lotions to no avail, and the vet had told her that Many other dogs in the neighborhood had the same problem. It was a beautiful summer, and the grass everywhere was infested, so that every time the dog was taken for a run, it was bitten all over. What I did was to visualize a protective coat of energy all around the dog. 2 days later, my friend told me there was no sign of any further bites. This happy situation lasted throughout the summer, even though other animals continued to get infested. About 10 years ago, I discovered that it is possible not only to protect an animal against insects, but also to communicate with the insects themselves. Janet and I were sitting in the garden in Sutton on a beautifully still and sunny day when we suddenly found ourselves covered with flying ants. For the next hour, they wouldn't leave us alone. We were very annoyed because we had been enjoying a rare break to sunbathe. Eventually, Janet had had enough and ran indoors for cover. I called out after her that I would speak to them, really intending it as a joke. However, I thought, why not? Although they are different species, we share the same life force and the same planet with them. I sat quietly in the sun, covered in ants, and closed my eyes. I asked them to leave us alone and direct them to an overgrown patch at the end of the garden. Almost immediately, they began to leave. Soon the garden, which had been covered with little winged bodies, was totally ant-free. I called Janet, who found it hard to believe that I had done it. Even I thought it could be a fluke. So after that, I experimented for a while to see whether it was or not. Not long after the flying ants episode, a South African visited me for healing for back trouble. As we talked, he asked me jokingly if I could do anything with animals. His home in South Africa was overrun by wild dogs. I thought it would be fun to have a go and asked him next time he came to bring a large-scale map of the area. He brought the map, and after his next healing session, we studied it together. I asked him to show me an area where I could direct the dogs to go, where they wouldn't be such a nuisance. He picked a spot, and I told him I would do my best. With his back better and his holiday over, the South African returned home. I worked telepathically on the dogs, asking them to leave his home and go to the designated area. After a month, as I hadn't heard from him, I stopped. Then, 4 months after he had left, the South African telephoned me out of the blue. He told me that the wild dogs had left his property 3 months before, but the biggest surprise of all was when he had passed the place we'd chosen to send them to. He had never seen so many dogs in one area looking, by wild dog standards, fit and well. They had obviously found a good food supply. Over the next few years, I persuaded cockroaches, moles, wasps, bees, and other unwanted creatures to move to other quarters. Mediumship is rather like owning a rough diamond that has to have every facet polished before it becomes whole and powerful. This particular gift was the polishing of another facet. I realized that I was quite often performing these feats simply as demonstrations and that I was dissipating valuable energy that I should be using for healing. So I will only do this now if it is genuinely affecting someone's physical or mental health. However, I still believe that before deciding to finish off so-called pests, who have a perfect right to be here, it's worthwhile trying to contact them to ask for their cooperation. Why not try it yourself? One important point is that they should always be directed toward a safe place. There must never be any intention to eliminate them, which would be completely contrary to the purpose of healing energies and mind energy. One day I had a frantic call from a friend of a friend whose daughter's bedroom had been invaded by ants. They were creeping in and out of the cracks in the plaster, and the little girl was so terrified she had to be moved out of her room. I asked for the address and also for the location of a place where the ants could safely go as an alternative dwelling. After some discussion, we agreed on a large pile of old leaves and branches which would not be used for a bonfire. Using the same method as with the dogs, I sat down and mentally communicated with the ants, explaining that they would be killed if they stayed, but would be quite safe if they moved down the garden to the woodpile. I did this twice a day for 2 days. On the third day, the woman phoned me to tell me that the ants had suddenly gathered together and marched out of the window like an army. Her husband had followed them, and they actually finished up in the woodpile where we had directed them to. The couple had plastered over the cracks in the walls, and their little girl was happily back in her own bed. They found it quite unbelievable. For large animals like horses, absent healing is a wonderful answer, particularly when they're suffering from emotional problems. Animals are just as capable of suffering from stress and loss of self-esteem as human beings, as I learned in particular from a horse. I was contacted one day by a man who told me that a stable girl at the riding school he attended was very concerned about one of the horses in her care. The horse had a large bald patch on his side which was permanently raw, and whenever he went out he started to limp and had to be returned to his stable. He had been taken to an equestrian hospital off and on for 2 years, but they could do nothing for him. I asked for the horse's name and the location of the stables. With this information in my mind, I sat down, closed my eyes, and found myself immediately in telepathic contact with the horse. I learned that he was very unhappy. He had once been a racehorse and had loved the roar of the crowds. However, following a leg injury, he was sold for private use, which he hated. He disliked the stables, and he was distressed at having been given a new name. I was given his real name, and telepathically I promised him that it would be returned to him. I also suggested that he should think of himself as king of the stables, which he surely was. 5 days later, I had a phone call from the stable girl to say that the patch of the horse's side had healed and he no longer limped. She also told me that her employer had been furious when she found out that she had consulted a healer and had nearly sacked the poor girl. However, she confirmed that I had been given the horse's correct original name, and she informed the owner that he must restore this to keep his horse happy. The owner and myself never communicated directly, but he must have taken notice because I heard that the horse continued to be healthy and apparently happy. 6 months later, the man who had first told me of the horse's plight came to see me, absolutely delighted. After his usual weekly ride, he had visited the horse's stable, and there above the door was painted his original name, just as I had promised. Who knows how my unseen friends had managed to influence the owner? Just recently, I had another occasion to have telepathic communication with a horse. This one belonged to Alan's secretary, Caroline. She was delighted when she first acquired Talisman, and he was a popular topic of conversation in the office. After a few weeks, however, Alan noticed that Caroline wasn't herself and asked her rather tentatively whether she had a problem. She told him she was upset because she would probably have to sell her horse. He had become exceedingly difficult to catch, and she often had to give up after chasing him around the field for hours. She was worn out. That evening, when Alan told me about Caroline's problem, I said I would have a word with Talisman. Straight away I sat down, closed my eyes, and visualized Caroline with her horse. Using his name, I was able to make telepathic contact with him. Probably a few horse-loving minds also linked up with me to help. I conveyed to him that life would be more peaceful if he obeyed Caroline's call. Next day, when Alan asked after her horse, Caroline said, "I can't believe it. Last night he came straight to the gate when I called him." Talisman has behaved perfectly ever since. There is one snag. Every time Caroline calls Talisman, the 2 horses with whom he shares a field also come galloping up and try to follow him through the gate. Alan has told me I must be more selective in future. Although holding a telepathic conversation with a horse may sound a little odd to some people, I don't think any real animal lover will find it that unusual. Barbara Woodhouse, for instance, seems to have had a very similar gift. After all, people have had telepathic relationships with their animals since the beginning of time. For mind-to-mind communication to take place in this way, animals must have a certain amount of mind energy. I have never studied it as I have in humans, but when I look at animals, I can see a glow around them. Some animals are quite psychic and attuned, and it must be their mind energy that enables lost cats and dogs to travel long distances and find their way home. Because of the incredible power of thought, absent healing can be carried out quite rapidly. If I have an enormous number of people to heal, I simply put all their letters together or write their names on a sheet of paper. I put my hands on them, close my eyes, and put energy into them, saying mentally, "Please help everyone here. That's all that's needed. The thought is the deed. I find it surprising that some people are skeptical about the power of absent healing, yet still expect to get results from prayer. They pray to someone or something they can't see or even begin to comprehend, and yet they have such faith. I very rarely pray for help because I feel strongly that having been given a mind, I should use it in a positive manner all the time instead of asking someone else to do the job for me. When I give absent healing, I know there are minds picking up information and organizing the energies, but I also visualize and use my own mind in a positive way. I believe more prayers would be answered if the people asking for help also did something positive at the same time. Somewhere along the line, we must become self-responsible. Each one of us has been given mind energy to use. We should allow it to strengthen and expand, not keep it imprisoned within the confinement of limited beliefs. All the same, there have been occasions when absent healing has been taken completely out of my hands. It's as if the moment I've told about a problem, someone has already seen to it. When I first met my agent, John, he told me he had suffered from a severe wheat allergy for 5 years. He had to be extremely careful what he ate, and his wife baked special bread for him. I said, "Oh, I'll do something about that for you." Afterwards, though, I was so busy thinking about our discussion that I completely forgot. 2 days later, I was sitting in the sun lounge daydreaming when a voice said, "Ring John and tell him he's been cured." I felt very guilty as I'd forgotten all about it. I rang John at once and passed on the message. Although he'd previously been skeptical, something must have convinced him because he said, "Right, I'll have a weekday tomorrow." Still feeling guilty, I thought I'd better back up the cure with some absent healing, but as soon as I started to direct energy towards him, I was blocked. I tried again and was blocked again. Then a voice said, "The job has been done. The job is finished." It was comforting to know that as soon as John had told me his problem, the message had been received and dealt with. No matter where you are in the world, absent healing can bring peace and a cure. It is also extraordinary how people have been mentally uplifted by the influence of the healing energies, with absent healing just as much with contact healing. Their friends remark on how they have changed and how much more positive their outlook has become. I have given absent healing to more people than I can possibly remember, but there are a few that stay with me, especially children, and I shall be writing about some of that later on. I have many times been asked to help children who have been given only a short time to live. After absent healing, they have recovered rapidly. Although I am used to the powerful effects of healing, such cases still make me believe in miracles. Part 1, Spiritual Gifts, Chapter 3, Mediumship. The public at large love to look upon mediums as mysterious, magical, or evil, depending on what stimulates them most. I would like to explain one of the mysteries surrounding mediumship and try to correct the distorted image that many people conjure up in their minds when the word is mentioned. Most people are unaware of the energies that surround us all, and even those who are aware may not give much thought to them. Why should they? Earning a living and looking after a family are enough to occupy most people's minds. It is only when things go wrong and the normal channels prove inadequate to help that people look for someone who can offer them hope and peace. Perhaps you have lost a partner or a relative. You may have heard about survival evidence, but you are frightened to visit a medium because you have heard peculiar stories about them. Let me reassure you. When you visit a reputable medium, you will probably come face to face with a quite ordinary looking person who will certainly put you at your ease. If you find yourself with any other kind, don't go back. Practically all professional mediums and healers are down-to-earth, ordinary people who do not consider themselves to be special. They use their talents every day and accept them as normal rather than as paranormal. Just as with any gift, whether it's music, carpentry, or surgery, the more the gift used, the more adept the user becomes. To be a medium is to be a teacher. Mediums are fed with information for the benefit of mankind. None of us know it all, but at least we can use our professional skills to help others to learn. All types of teachers are needed today, not least truly spiritual teachers, who should not be confused with religious teachers, not all of whom would be described as spiritual. I have only visited 4 mediums in my life, all of whom were excellent. If I need help for anything, from medicine to car maintenance, I always try to find the most talented and highly recommended professional. Seeking a medium should be exactly the same. If you don't want to be disappointed or misled, be sure to choose the very best. Recommendation from someone who has already been helped is usually the safest way. But if you don't know of anyone personally, there are organizations you can contact. My healing work and my mediumship constantly overlap. Healing, I must confess, is my first love and a tremendous challenge. However, clairvoyance and survival evidence have a very important place in my work, showing as they do the extraordinary powers of mind energy and proving that the mind survives the death of the physical body. Survival evidence is the term used to describe messages from people who are dead. Mediums receive them either in the form of telepathic communication from a dead person or by actually hearing their voice through clairaudience. There are many different ways of hearing. Voices may be heard inside or outside your head, or the thought may just appear telepathically in your mind. More often than not, the medium simultaneously receives a clairvoyant picture, which enables him to describe the speaker to the sitter. Clairvoyance means clear seeing. It is the gift of clear vision, usually into the future, and it has been used to help people throughout the ages. It is an extension of the faculty of intuition, which everyone has to some extent, and differs from survival evidence in that it does not necessarily involve direct communication from individual minds. My own explanation is that I tune in to universal energies, rather like turning on a television set, and receive words and picture as though I am plugging into a vast telecommunications system. There are several ways of receiving clairvoyance. Some 7 years ago, I was given a lot of information about my own future and my family's through automatic writing. I found myself covering sheets of paper every day. A great deal of it has already come true, and I know there is more to come. Clairvoyance also enables you to see into the past. A few years ago, I visited Biggin Hill with some friends. I was sitting quietly in the sun while they looked at the plains when suddenly the scene changed dramatically. I was taken back to the time of the Second World War. I watched, fascinated, as men in wartime flying gear and fitters and dungarees rushed to and fro. This flashback must have been only a few minutes long, but it seemed to last forever. I find that most of the clairvoyance I receive is positive. I never forecast disasters. Indeed, I am rarely given negative information, though I may get warnings which can avert unhappiness if they are heeded. There are some mediums who predict disasters and death. This is thoroughly irresponsible. Even if I received such information, I would question whether I was 100% certain. But being a very positive person myself, I only attract positive minds. I do have some reservations about clairvoyance. However, for some people, wanting to know the future can become a sort of a drug. They want it again and again, especially when they are given information that turns out to be accurate. Like any form of addiction, this can be dangerous, negating the person's independence and self-responsibility. I have also been told many times by clients that after having received clairvoyance, they feel that they can sit back and allow things to happen. Then, when the predicted events don't happen straight away, they become frustrated and sometimes angry. When I realized that people were sitting back and doing nothing, I felt quite upset and didn't want to give any more clairvoyance. In fact, my friends think I'm mean because I am unwilling to give them sittings. But I honestly find that much more effective than predicting wonderful futures is to tell people about mind energy and encourage them to use it to create their own wonderful futures. 3 years before I met Alan, I visited a medium in London who told me that the man with whom I was to share the rest of my life would come to live with me when the daffodils were out. Every year as the daffodils came and went, I used to joke about it. "Where is this man?" I'd complain to Janet, but I didn't take it too seriously and I carried on with the rest of my life. I love daffodils, and one autumn I planted 1,000 bulbs in my garden. It was about a month later that Michael Benteen told me that the man who would share my life would be with me in the spring. The following March, Alan and I were enjoying together the most beautiful spring I can ever remember, with daffodils everywhere we went. I should also have been told to plant my own. Simply waiting for things to happen is negative. I teach positivity and self-help. Negativity of any kind is harmful, not only to ourselves, but also to those around us. However, giving clairvoyance is a part of my work, and it is always interesting when my predictions are fulfilled. This can take time. Clairvoyance may show you the end of the road, but not all the footsteps leading up to it or all the little paths leading off it before you reach your destination. You have to walk that road and work out your own life, whether you know the future or not. When people find they have to take the steps themselves or start going up one of those side paths, they may think, "This is nothing like the clairvoyance I was given." Then, perhaps 2 years later, they'll ring up to say, "You'll never guess what happened. Everything has turned out exactly as forecast." You also get the skeptics who, rather than sit back and wait, go and do the opposite of what the medium has recommended. One of these is a publisher friend called John. Over a period of 2 or 3 years, he asked me regularly for clairvoyance and then deliberately went against any advice I gave him. This was partly because he didn't want his decision-making influenced by anyone else, partly as an experiment to see whether his behavior would alter the outcome. In fact, it never did. What I predicted always happened. This gift is part of my personality, and there's no question of switching it on and off. It can arrive at any time and any place. I can be sitting at dinner enjoying the conversation, and suddenly I am given information concerning one of the guests. When clairvoyance arrives spontaneously like this, it is usually for a purpose. Sometimes it is to convince the unconvinced. Because of the nature of Alan's work, we often entertain. At one dinner party, I told an overseas client who was rather skeptical about my work that his right-hand man would leave him within 3 months. He said this was most unlikely. His colleague had been with him for 12 years. About 3 weeks later, he phoned Alan to say that the man had given notice. Usually the purpose of spontaneous clairvoyance is to comfort and reassure someone who is anxious or under stress. I also feel that when it comes unsought, it is much more reliable than it might be if I were giving sittings for hour after hour. Mediums often have to interpret the information they receive. If they are unwell or tired, there is a risk of their giving an incorrect interpretation. The well-being of the client must always be uppermost in the clairvoyant's mind. I always make sure that what I give to others has come to me so clearly that I can't be mistaken. My friend Louise received very detailed spontaneous clairvoyance on her first visit to me for healing, which was also our first meeting. She had just embarked on a second marriage, and in the autumn of 1983, she and her husband, anxious to start a new home together, had started looking for a country cottage in Oxfordshire. However, I immediately saw that they would be moving to Sussex, where they would be near a commuter line. Louise has to travel to London for her work. Accordingly, the couple began house hunting in Sussex. At first, they had no luck, but on her next visit, I was still certain that Sussex was where they would find their dream cottage. The clarity of the pictures given to me was amazing. I could see the South Downs and the surrounding countryside as if I were there. And I had further information for Louise. Although you can go on looking, I said, the cottage will in fact find you. I described it to her as I saw it. It has hills in the distance, it's surrounded by trees, and there is some sort of pond adjacent to it, although there is a large house next to it. I don't think you will be able to afford that one. The cottage is not free at the moment, but you will be in it by next summer. Within a week, Louise had received a phone call from her sister to say that her husband's uncle had just died, leaving everything to his sister. The property included a big house in Sussex, which had been sold, and a cottage next door, which the sister was thinking of selling. Louise asked me to go and see it with them. Before we set out, she showed me a photograph of the cottage. I said, "Yes, this is the house I saw. It belongs to a woman who has only about 3 weeks to live." When we drove down there, it was just as I had seen it, a charming rosy brick cottage next to a large, beautiful, but dilapidated house, which the couple could certainly not have afforded. It was in a country area, but near a commuter line. The garden, which included a sunken lawn, was bordered by trees and had an uninterrupted view of South Downs at one end, all exactly as I had seen it. But I was puzzled. I told Louise, "This is just what I saw, but there's no water. I know there was water." The new owner was very ill and was in fact to die within a month, but before then Louise and her husband took me to meet her along with a young cousin. While I gave the sick woman some healing to relieve her pain, Louise and her husband walked in the garden with the cousin. He suddenly burst out in an embarrassed way. "There's one thing I ought to have told you about the house. When my uncle bought it, there was a pond where the sunken lawn is, so it may be very damp." That was obviously where I had seen the water. Could the previous owner have been giving me the information and showing me the scene as he had seen it the first time? He had obviously loved the place, and I feel sure that he wanted the next owners to love it too. Louise tells me that the house, with its calm beauty and ancient atmosphere, feels very important to them, both. It has not only given them roots, but it also a source of inspiration to her husband, who is a writer. The actual purchase was dragged out by legal complications and the sale of Louise' London house, but in August 1984 they finally moved in. A curious and pleasant postscript to the story is that not long afterwards, Alan and I moved to our present home, which is 10 minutes walk away. After their move, Louise wrote to me, "During all this doubt and worry, the power of your clairvoyance and the accuracy in detail after detail, and your assurance that we would eventually live in the cottage kept our spirits and determination going. However, knowing it's all going to come right in the end doesn't mean that you can stop making an effort." Another potential misuse of clairvoyance is when clients simply want decision-making taken out of their hands, which isn't good for anyone. Sometimes I've asked these people, "What do you want out of life?" and received the answer, "I want someone to tell me." But we were all given minds with which to plan our own lives. Most people know at heart what they would like to achieve. The best help you can give yourself is to visualize your goal in your mind and work steadily towards it. It is your life, and there is always a choice. If you can train yourself to have clear vision by being positive and independent and working hard for your ultimate goals, you hold your fate in your own hands. It's always best to try to make positive decisions for yourself and only seek clairvoyance when the situation is confused. One situation I have learned to avoid is giving clairvoyance to both partners in a troubled relationship. The clairvoyant can only too easily be used as a scapegoat. Each partner can bring out information given in confidence and use it as a weapon against the other, instead of taking responsibility for their own feelings and opinions. Clairvoyance is very useful for surveying houses. If I am given an address, I can immediately list any existing problems. Only recently I did this for a friend. I could see that among other things there were 2 defective slates and a cracked gutter, although the builders were supposed to have completed the roof. They were sent back to have another look, and this time they found them. I have detected faulty damp courses which have eluded the surveyor, and I can also tell whether there is a bad atmosphere or whether the neighbors are likely to be difficult. All extremely useful to anyone before buying a house. One young couple came to me about 6 years ago. They were interested in a house, but the price was suspiciously low, and there seemed to be a great deal of secrecy concerning the previous tenants. I was able to tell them that the previous tenants had suffered serious health problems because the house was built above a stream. Underground streams, however deep, usually have an adverse effect on health, and I advised the couple not to buy. They took my advice. Later, the existence of the stream was confirmed by a well-known dowser. Another helpful clairvoyance gift is my ability on being given a name to describe the owner's character. It is as though someone shows me a file with all the relevant information in it. I can't remember how many thousands of names I have been given over the years, but the detailed summing up I receive always turns out to be accurate. I'm often asked how this can be when so many people have the same name. I can only assume that someone who is aware of the person concerned is responsible for beaming the information to me. When Alan was about to visit Hong Kong for the first time, he made some appointments in advance. He gave me the names of 3 Chinese contacts he was to meet, and I wrote down the clairvoyant information I was given about them. They were all 3 totally different. He phoned me a week later to say I had been right about them all. He still used his own judgment, as he always does, but this extra knowledge reinforced his confidence. Clairvoyance can be an incredible business asset as it helps people to keep one step ahead. I have helped many professional men and women in this way. Obviously, it should only be used ethically. It might be possible to use it for self-seeking motives, but anyone thinking of doing so should bear in mind a very important spiritual law. What you give out, you get back. A medium or anyone else who used clairvoyance for the wrong purposes would certainly find it rebounding on him in some unpleasant way. In fact, much of the business-oriented clairvoyance I have given has been to protect the innocent. There was the young woman whom I told not to accept an appointment as company secretary and never to sign anything for her boss, which he was trying to persuade her to do. I could see that if she agreed, she would eventually be liable for heavy costs, as there were some unsavory things happening within her firm. She took my advice and later told me that I had been absolutely right. I was able to help a young man through what must have been the worst period of his life. He had become involved with some men who were highly experienced in dubious financial wheeling and dealing. He visited me regularly for 2 years, during which I was able to tell him who he could trust and who he couldn't, and foresaw every single twist and turn his enemies were about to perform. Consequently, he was ready to cope with each situation as it arose and was never caught out. There was no doubt that this foreknowledge saved him from going to prison for other people's misdemeanors. Probably the most satisfying use of clairvoyance is when my gifts can provide guidance to people who are genuinely seeking the right path and are willing to put in some effort. Take Andrew, for example, a young man who came to visit me in March 1985. After graduating in Oriental languages, Andrew had just spent 6 months working for a computer company in London, where his talents were not properly employed. He felt he was in a rut and was quite despairing. We had met once socially, and he thought I might be able to help him. He was also very keen to give up smoking, a habit he'd been trying to break for some years, and knew I'd been successful in treating this with hypnosis. I took him into my healing room and after a brief chat, asked him to sit down quietly. I immediately began receiving information about him from his parental grandfather. I described the grandfather, very accurately according to Andrew. I told him that he'd come to help him and was actually looking after him and guiding him all the time. I assured him that he mustn't worry about his career, since his future was being taken care of. He would shortly be offered a new job which would take him to the Far East, where he had already spent some time studying. More important, the move would introduce him to some high-powered and influential people who would be of great help when he came to fulfill his destiny. I knew that he was on a spiritual path and he would eventually help other people. I told him about some of his previous lives, which he had shared with his wife, and reassured him that there were people looking after him and channeling him in the right direction. Our talk continued for a long time, and Andrew was so overwhelmed by all I told him that he forgot to ask for hypnotherapy. In a recent letter to me, he comments, "I cannot really adequately describe the feeling of tremendous inner peace and well-being I felt after my visit. I had felt at a very low ebb, but after leaving, a profound feeling of relief and happiness." The fact that Andrew's future was already planned out for him didn't mean that it was all made easy. As he says, "You're pointed in a certain direction, and then it's up to you." It happened that he had already been interviewed by a company which was considering opening up a branch in Singapore, but he had heard no more from them. Shortly after his visit to me, they asked him to prepare a proposal about why and how they should set up a Far Eastern branch. He prepared the proposal, which involved a good deal of work, and again heard nothing for some time. After a 6-week wait, he telephoned them because the firm he was with was going through major changes, and he felt it would not be right to take part in these if he was leaving. This time his proposal was accepted, and he was offered a 3-month trial period to set up the headquarters in Singapore. He achieved this successfully in August 1986 and has been working there happily ever since. He has since written to me that he has met the important people I told him of, and everything you forecast has come true. Incidentally, I saw Andrew several times for healing after the first visit. He was still failing to beat his smoking habit on his own, and the following June, I gave hypnotherapy for this. Since then, he has never wanted to smoke. As for his spiritual path, he says he would describe himself as a very ethical businessman, and he feels that the experience he is gaining now is in some way preparing him for a future in which his talents will be of use to others. It always surprises me when people ask me about my religion. Healers and mediums belong to all sorts of religion, but healing is a beautiful spiritual experience. To me, there is an important distinction. Religion is a man-made concept with sets of rules based on the Bible or other religious books. Spirituality is your spontaneous reaction to life. If you are a loving and compassionate person, you won't need rules to stop you from doing wrong or harmful actions. You will simply not want to. Truly spiritual people are those who have lived and learned through many lifetimes and have acquired love and compassion as their minds have expanded. There are levels and degrees of spirituality according to how far your mind has progressed. Spiritually progressed people do not need to be guided by religious dogma. In fact, I find that they have a code of honor and a tolerance that I don't always see practiced by some people who regard themselves as religious. We all have a perfect right to believe what we wish according to our spiritual awareness. What we haven't the right to do is to impose our ideas on others or crucify them if their beliefs differ from ours. We all have different paths, and we should follow the one that brings the most peace and satisfaction to ourselves. So I always advise people to listen to what others say, ignore if they wish, but never ridicule them. What is most important to my spiritual beliefs is the certainty that we continue living after death. Like all forms of energy, mind energy is indestructible. Therefore, the mind cannot die. Only the brain, which is matter, dies. I have seen mind energy leaving the dying, and I am convinced that this is the part of them that lives on, the spirit, in fact. The mind simply moves into another dimension where it is free from its limiting physical counterpart. It is able to help with healing and to communicate through mediums. It is a great pity that something so wonderful should appear to many people to be fearful. The people who want to communicate are the friends or relatives they loved while they were alive, and their personalities are still exactly the same. but in the dimension they now occupy, they're able to see much more clearly and further ahead. No longer locked in a time capsule as we are on Earth, they are able to warn us or guide us, and if linked to us by love, can also share in our joys or anxieties. I believe that we ourselves escape from being time-bound by leaving our bodies in our sleep. That is why some dreams are predictive, and also why, when we go to sleep with a problem, we often wake up with the answer. In both this dimension and the next, we learn lessons which help us to progress. Most of us go through many reincarnations, each one with a specific purpose. As we progress through numerous journeys of enlightenment, our spirituality hopefully increases, and as the mind expands, the mind energy becomes finer and finer. Most of us around today are on a low to middle rung of the ladder. Only a few people in this dimension are truly progressed spirits. In this sense, I don't think that most healers and mediums are terribly spiritual. What all mediums have in common is that they have expansive mind energies, which can reach out and touch into the next dimension and are capable of acting as receivers through which the dead can communicate in mind-to-mind contact. I get rather annoyed when people expect mediums to be holier than thou. They need to be down to earth, or they would lose their human touch and their ability to cope with the very earthly problems they confront, both during their development and daily in their work. Compassion is more important than either intellect or an oversensitive holiness. All good mediums are people who are willing to serve and help others by passing on messages from the dead. This activity, incidentally, expands the mind further. There are people who disapprove efforts to contact the dead. I have never tried to contact the dead. They are so busy contacting me that I am usually relieved to have a break. Over centuries, the minds of the deceased have been trying desperately to prove to the living that there is survival after death. Accepting this message would remove the fear of dying and make our present lives far happier. There is no doubt in my mind that I have been taught by unseen people all my life. I have been persuaded to seek knowledge and discouraged from wasting time. When I have ignored their advice, my way has been blocked, and nothing goes right until I am on the right path again. It is through this guidance that I have learned about mind energy, and that the mind and the personality survive the death of the physical body. One question I have been asked time after time is whether there isn't a danger of evil minds communicating. Let me put that fear to rest for good. There is no chance of attracting a nasty if you visit a genuine and positive-minded medium or healer. Someone who is working continually to alleviate suffering can only attract like minds. I know that I have been taught by the finest teachers, and one lesson has repeated again and again. There is a universal law that dictates that whatever we give out will be returned in full, often many times over. I have also been taught that love unites, hate destroys. Love and compassion are the link to the power that manifests through a good medium or healer. Love, in its purest form, is the ultimate energy. Healers and mediums absorb knowledge all the time, and it can come in a variety of ways. Sometimes a voice speaks clearly to me while I'm occupied with something like washing up. At other times, information is impressed on my mind less directly, particularly if my mind is in another dimension, as it was when I'm healing. The realization of what I have been given will come later. I may be writing or meditating when a fascinating idea will come to the surface. My editor says it sounds like putting a program disk into a word processor. All the information is on it, but you can't read it until you switch on and bring it up on the screen. It is often suggested that survival evidence is obtained through telepathic communication between the sitter and the medium. I have tested this theory time and time again. It is certainly possible for some basic information to be picked up in this way, but the quality of a genuine communication is quite unmistakable. As you will see from the stories in the next chapter, it is quite usual for evidence to be given which can only be confirmed much later on, when more information has come to light. Telepathy is really the ability to alter your mental wavelength, enabling you to attune to another mind. My ability to communicate with the minds of other species is purely telepathic. Some people can cultivate and practice telepathy, but more often than not, it occurs by chance. Most people have had the experience of knowing when a friend was about to ring. Thought is vibration. Therefore, mind interaction is invariably like to like. Only minds with the same vibrational frequencies can communicate with each other. Minds with differing vibrations would be unable to do so. This is why, incidentally, some people will find themselves getting better survival evidence from one medium than from another, who in turn may give brilliant evidence to someone else. Another reason why not all mediums are brilliant all the time is that there is a great demand for their services. It is so easy to fall into the trap of overworking, and as in any job, when fatigue creeps in, talent, psychic or otherwise, suffers. My psychic talents have for years brought peace, happiness, and hope to people, not through any knowledge of mine, but from those, now deceased, who have communicated through me. I have seen people transformed in minutes as I pass on information which only they could possibly identify with. Details of names, addresses, and past experiences have them in no doubt who the messages are from. I have seen spirits standing or sitting beside people in restaurants, pubs, trains, buses, airports, in fact, just about everywhere. I don't have to be very quiet or create a special atmosphere. If you are totally psychic, there is no need at all for dim lights and hushed surroundings. I also find that evidence given in everyday settings is often more easily accepted by people who might be too skeptical or too scared to visit a medium. When I was living in Sutton, the telephone rang constantly with requests for absent healing. It was fascinating how spirit people used to appear as soon as I answered the phone. Sometimes it was quite unnerving for the person at the other end when I told them I had a deceased relative or friend standing beside me who wanted to communicate with them. The evidence was often so detailed that it would go on for an hour. Spirit people still arrive when people telephone me, but these days I no longer have the time to continue at such length. The first time I saw a spirit actually waiting for someone to arrive, I walked into my healing room and was surprised to see a shadowy woman sitting in one of the chairs. She sat looking straight ahead of her as if expecting someone, so I left her alone. When my next caller arrived a few minutes later, she looked exactly like a younger version of the presence in the healing room, and I told her I thought her mother was waiting for her. When we went in, the spirit was no longer visible, but she immediately began communicating with her daughter through me. In order to materialize, spirits have to make use of the energies available. Then, when they want to communicate, they generally disappear from view since there may not be enough energy to do both. To protect themselves into this dimension, both visibly and audibly, requires a tremendous effort. For an hour, my patient's mother talked about their family, giving names and addresses and messages for family members. Some of the information meant nothing to my sitter. This quite often happens, but when I ask the person to check it out with other relatives, the meaning always becomes clear. As this young woman was leaving, I asked whether she and her mother had looked alike. She laughed and told me that they had always been mistaken for each other. Then she thanked me profusely. Knowing for certain that her mother had survived the death of the physical body had made her feel quite differently about life. Since then, I have had countless similar experiences. I can't recall how many times I have been told, "You have changed my life." Always, I am happy to add, for the better. So many minds are trying to change all our lives for our benefit. For thousands of years, they have been desperately trying to prove the survival of the mind, yet we still doubt. The dead have various ways of contacting us. A very common phenomenon is the healing room being suddenly filled with the most beautiful fragrance, usually the favorite perfume of a relative who has chosen this way to identify herself. Another method with which I am experimenting is through tape recordings. Despite the regular interference, I still record whilst healing because sometimes interesting things happen. Once, when we played a tape back, we could hear the sound of coughing. The person with me identified it as his father, who had died of emphysema. He said he could never forget that sound. I've never so far recorded the voices of spirit helpers. However, on one occasion, a friend brought a brand new tape, which we recorded on while healing. On playing it back, we were very moved when we heard the most exquisite music. Sadly, the next time we put it on, the music had completely disappeared. I experiment with tapes all the time. Most of the results have been mediocre so far, but I am convinced that at some time the voices of the so-called deceased will use this method of communication. I have also done some experiments on the interference with a well-known physicist. He told me that the sound is called white noise. It seems that the energies around me are affecting every known wavelength. Once when we were in the middle of a recording, a voice called out, "Hey!" in a rather comic-sounded Cockney accent, startling us both. The house was perfectly quiet, both inside and out. His wife was also present in the house, and we all agreed that the voice could not have come from the outside. Some minds choose quite comical methods of communicating. Indeed, since practicing as a professional medium, I have enjoyed more humor in my life than ever before. This might seem odd to anyone who believes that communicating with the dead should be a serious and solemn affair, but you can't be miserable when the so-called dead are as hilarious as they were in real life. I don't think that the communicator in the following story was intending to be funny, but we've laughed a lot about it since. My friend Fred is an electrician and worked in partnership with his father-in-law before the latter's death. Very early in my healing career, his wife Shirley asked me to give hand analysis sessions to herself and a friend. I was still at the stage when I didn't quite trust my powers of mediumship and was using the hand as a focus. On the night they arrived, I asked Shirley to sit downstairs whilst her friend Margaret and I went up to the small room I used when I wanted to be peaceful. When we returned, Shirley said, "You poor thing, what terrible neighbors you've got. All the time you were upstairs, someone was jumping on the floor with hobnailed boots." I looked at her in astonishment. Our Sutton flat was built like a castle, solid as a rock, and the first few months of frantic phenomena had stopped. Margaret and I had heard nothing. Perhaps it was the pigeons, I suggested. Shirley looked at me disbelievingly. Before her session, we looked through all the upstairs rooms, but found nothing unusual. During Shirley's reading, without realizing what I was doing, I let go of her hand and said, "Your father-in-law is saying that when rewiring factories, Fred should attach a piece of string to an electric cable and tie it to a mouse's tail. Put a piece of cheese at the far end, and it will be easy for the mouse to pull a new wire through the conduit." It sounded so nonsensical that Shirley and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. I said, "I'm sorry about that. I expect he was pulling our leg." When we finally went upstairs, Margaret was as white as a sheet. "I've heard it as well, just like someone with hobnailed boots jumping on the floor. What on earth is it?" I was puzzled as they were. It was quite different from the sort of phenomenon I normally experienced, somehow much more earthy and physical. Shirley rang me the next day to say that she had given Fred his father's message while they were in bed, and he was flabbergasted. On their last job together, his father had said, "What we need in this business is to put a piece of cheese at the far end and attach the electric cable to a pet mouse's tail and turn it through." Fred tells me that since then, an electrical gadget called a mouse has actually been invented to do just this. Then, just when Fred had decided it was time for sleep, Shirley mentioned the noise that had puzzled us all. This was almost too much for Fred, who went quite white. He told Shirley that before his father did any electrical job in a house, he would always jump on the floor to see how safe it was. What's more, he always wore boots, which made an awful noise. Fred was quite shaken and didn't want to know any more. But Shirley and I have always laughed when we recall that evening and the spirit who leaped around in hobnailed boots. Fred and Shirley have received a lot of healing and clairvoyance from me. At one time, when Fred was coming regularly for healing, his father made contact at every session. Through me, he gave Fred the names of people who would offer him contracts, together with the exact nature and value of each one. He was always right. It became a weekly occurrence for Shirley to ring me to say that, once again, confirmation had been received. Fred never quite got used to these communications, but it was his father's way of giving help when it was most needed, and a perfect example of how, even after death, people who care for us can give us not only love, but also very practical assistance. There are thousands of people walking the streets today who have had wonderful survival evidence, but are too afraid of what people think to talk about it openly. It is rather like an underground movement, unseen and unheard until there is an explosion. Perhaps this book will help light a fuse. There's more to come at the next video as we explore what it is to help others heal. Meet me at the next video, hit the like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe to the channel.